I think the most important thing to understand about Hezbollah when it comes to its targeting of America was that started with Iran saying, I need you to do this. And that's important today as we think about this recent war between Israel and Iran and the fact that the US dropped bombs on Iran's nuclear sites. That's why there's concern right now that maybe Iranian operatives themselves, maybe criminal proxies that Iran might hire from, say, Eastern European organized crime groups, or some of its terrorist proxies like Hezbollah might do something at the behest of Iran even today.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original and presented by First Form. Go get your First Form supplements right now. I finally started working out again. I'm sore today. But the supplements definitely do help. So you guys go check them out at firstform.com/Borderland. Our next guest is Matthew Levitt, who is one of the leading experts in counterterrorism in terrorist groups. He specifically focuses on Hamas and Hezbollah. And today we talk a lot about Hezbollah. We help define what that is for you guys, the listeners, to better understand some of the potential threats that we face, and as well as their involvement in South America. Well, Matt, I'm going to tell you, this is such a conversation that is so out of my comfort zone. I'm excited to learn a lot today. I am someone who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I am someone who, obviously had experiences with some of these extremist Islamic groups. And, as it goes from like Al-Qaeda to this to ISIS, it starts to get a little blurry and confusing for me. And so I'm really excited to learn more about what Yeah. So if you don't mind, Matt, can you please just give a bio for the audience so they can better get to know who you are?
Sure. I'm Matt Levitt. I direct the Counterterrorism and Intelligence Program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a nonpartisan think tank focused on U.S. policy towards the greater Middle East. Think Morocco to Iran and Turkey to Yemen. And I teach at Georgetown and Pepperdine universities. And for my sins, I am a recovering government bureaucrat. I started off my career in FBI counterterrorism as a counterterrorism analyst up through and including 9/11. I led the analytical team for Flight 175, the second flight to the Trade Center. Later, I did some part-time government work, a little bit for the 9/11 Commission, counterterrorism advisor at the State Department, and a short stint at Treasury last year. And in between that, I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. So while you were in Iraq, I was co-lead for the Iraq Threat Finance Cell, which was helping to go through the financial Hawala notes and the pocket litter for the rounds of night raids. We had people forward deployed in Iraq and then back in DC. And I've written a book on Hezbollah and a podcast on Hezbollah and an interactive map on Hezbollah. Do a lot of work on that group, but also on the Hamas's and the Al-Qaeda's and the Islamic States. And unfortunately, in Iran, there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some questions about Iran as well. So let me ask you, if you don't mind, for the audience, help me better understand Hezbollah compared to all the others that we've heard in the media. We hear Hezbollah, and I'm speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for a bigger audience. You hear it, but you don't quite necessarily understand the difference between them, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or any of these other ones. And exactly how do we kind of better understand what's going on with Hezbollah and who they are?
All right. So a lot of people tend to put these Muslim jihadi groups together in one basket because when we get to know them at all, it's through news articles about some shooting or bombing and a lot of jihadi rhetoric. But there are actually important differences between some of these groups. Hamas is a Sunni nationalist group. Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State don't believe in nationalism at all. They want to get rid of all borders and nationalities. They're all about the Muslim nation, the Muslim Ummah, and converting the world to their form of Islam. And their form of Islam is so extreme that even if you are a fellow Muslim, but you aren't as extreme as they are, they don't consider you a Muslim, and they can call you a heretic, someone who could be killed under their interpretation of Islam. All of that, the Hamas, the Islamic State, the Al-Qaeda's, that's on the Sunni side of the equation of the extremist Muslim milieu. Of course, we should note that the overwhelming majority of Muslims of all kinds are not extremists. But there's also the smaller major sect within Islam of Shia Islam. And Hezbollah is a Shia militant organization, terrorist organization, and Iran is a Shia state. So this takes us back, if we can jump back a second, to 1979, the Shia Islamic Revolution in Iran. And with that revolution, the Ayatollah comes up with a new idea. It used to be that Shia clerics stayed in the religious schools and left the politics to the politicians. Ayatollah came and said, no, only an Ayatollah a religious cleric of a certain degree can be the mouthpiece of God on earth. And so he kind of merged these ideas, and suddenly a cleric had to be the leader, but it wasn't just the leader. It's like a theological idea. And so you have militant Shia movements throughout the region that are very, very close to Iran and believe that the leader of Iran, the supreme leader of Iran, is the mouthpiece of God on earth. There's a spectrum along that support. The most intimate is Lebanese Hezbollah, which was created by Iran in the first few years after the revolution. The revolution was 1979. Hezbollah was founded in 1982. And Hezbollah at first is fighting other sects in Lebanon, Sunnis, Maronite Christians, Druze, DRUZ. But then as it starts carrying out attacks targeting Western interests in Lebanon and then outside Lebanon, we now know with 2020 hindsight vision, kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, that this was all at the behest of Iran. And this has come out in open court, declassified intelligence. For example, the U.S. intelligence community intercepted telephone calls between Iran's main intelligence agency, its Ministry of Intelligence and Security, MOIS, and its ambassador in Damascus at the time, saying, reach out to these guys who are becoming what became known as Hezbollah, and tell them to carry out, quote unquote, a spectacular action targeting the U.S. Marines, which of course led to the U.S. Marine barracks bombing in the early 1980s, followed by not one but two bombings of the U.S. Embassy and much, much more. So there's a lot of things that are common to these groups in that they're Muslim extremists. They're not representative of the vast majority of Muslims. But there's a lot that divides them, and they tend to despise each other. Hezbollah fought Islamic State, and they don't get along with each other. And I'll caveat that by saying that despite that, they will sometimes work together. The current leadership of Al-Qaeda is believed to have some type of safe haven or house arrest or somewhere in between in Iran. And so it's not quite the case that they'll always fight each other, because sometimes my enemy's enemy is my friend in this part of the world.
Man, okay. So is there a reason why they target Americans?
Let's stick to Hezbollah now. And look, Hezbollah first started carrying out attacks targeting Americans and in general the West, French, Germans, others, at the behest of Iran. So Iran and Iraq were fighting the Iran-Iraq War, devastating war. And the United States and France and others were helping Iraq in that war. And that led to a variety of things, one of which was Iran started trying to carry out attacks on U.S. interests. And that led to attacks on our embassy, attacks on the U.S. Marines who came as peacekeepers to Lebanon, kidnapping and brutally murdering our CIA station chief, Bill Buckley, a whole bunch of other kidnapping plots and more, and then moving beyond Lebanon to attacks in Europe, South America, the Gulf, etc. This was primarily at the behest of Iran. But again, Hezbollah has its own interest for wanting to carry out attacks against the United States as well. Usually it started with revenge. So Iran asked Hezbollah and some Iraqi militias, the Badr organization, for example, to carry out attacks targeting U.S. interests in Kuwait, because the U.S. was reflagging Kuwaiti oil tankers in the context of the Iran-Iraq War. And some of those people were captured. One of them was a very, very senior Hezbollah operative named Mustafa Badruddin, whose brother-in-law was the head of the Hezbollah terrorist wing in Madmugniya. Badruddin was ultimately killed in Syria many years later. But for years, Badruddin was in a Kuwaiti prison, and they wanted him out. So they carried out attacks against Americans and French and Germans and others in an effort to try and get him released. When they carried out some operations in Europe and a couple of their people were arrested in Germany, they started carrying out attacks to get those guys released. And it kind of was this, circular motion. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing to understand about Hezbollah when it comes to its targeting of America was that started with Iran saying, I need you to do this. And that's important today as we think about this recent war between Israel and Iran and the fact that the U.S. dropped bombs on Iran's nuclear sites. That's why there's concern right now that maybe Iranian operatives themselves, maybe criminal proxies that Iran might hire from, say, Eastern European organized crime groups, or some of its terrorist proxies like Hezbollah might do something at the behest of Iran even today.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. So let me follow up with this. I know for a fact in the past 4 years or so, when the big influx of illegal immigration was going on, there was many different people from many different countries coming across, especially areas like Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, all these different places you can name. And in my head, I'm starting to think, is there, and I'm sure you can answer, there's a heavy possibility that some Hezbollah has come across our southern borders. Is that correct?
So we actually know of very few cases where that happened for sure. There were some. And in fact, at one point, one guy, I described him in my book as like a 007. He was like a highly trained operative of Hezbollah, came in the false bottom of a car, smuggled in through Mexico, something out of a bad movie. When he was in the United States, he was primarily engaging in criminal activities to raise money for Hezbollah. It's not really clear why he was here. Did he work really hard, fight really hard? Was here some type of R&R? It's not clear. Eventually, he was arrested and convicted of material support. We know of a couple of other cases. The guy who smuggled him in was a Mexican Lebanese dual national who, it turns out, smuggled in a whole bunch of people, including a bunch of Lebanese people. So were none of them Hezbollah? I can't tell you that. But I also wouldn't go so far as to say that most of them or even a bunch of them were. There are a lot of Lebanese who wanted to get into this country. It's a vulnerability more than it is a known threat. It's one that we've gotten better at dealing with over time. And it's not just Hezbollah. We just had a case that came to light of an Iranian guy who was indicted, at least in the first instance, for having kind of underage porn on his system that he was sharing with people. But the FBI noted in a memo to the judge requesting that he not be let out on bail that actually he's also a people smuggler, and in at least one case had smuggled into the country someone who admitted he was a member of Iran's Quds Force, which is kind of the foreign operations special forces element of Iran that works closely with Hezbollah. At the end of the day, to hark back to that 1979 revolution, that revolution was never tended to end at the borders of Iran. So there's an army, the Artesh, whose job is to defend the borders of Iran. And then there's the Revolutionary Guard Corps, whose job is to defend the revolution. And within the Revolutionary Guard Corps, there's something called the Quds Force. Quds means Jerusalem. The Quds Force is there to export the revolution. And it's the main component, liaising with the Hezbollahs and others, liaised with Hamas in the lead up to October 7th, for example, and took some losses just recently by the Israelis. But we have some number of cases where people related to the Quds Force from Iran or Hezbollah have been smuggled across the border. I'm actually impressed at how few cases we can actually point to and say this happened then. Mostly it's a vulnerability.
Well, what was interesting, and just because of my experience with the connection to seeing the Border Patrol and know it happened, there was a lot of times when and some individuals from the Middle East were apprehended, and it was kind of swept under the rug in the sense of not giving national attention to it because not to make it look like they were targeting Middle Easterns, as well as just wasn't something that was allowed by the organization to post on social media that they've apprehended, Middle Eastern individuals, a group of them or one or two or three. Yeah. So there is a number somewhere out there in the past 4 years or so, but it wasn't public knowledge very much. And I'm not sure why that was really, but
I remember there was some cases where they weren't sure how to talk about it because they didn't have hard intel. The guy was Hezbollah, but he had some kind of Hezbollah tattoos, this type of thing. We had a case 6 months, maybe a little bit more ago, where a guy comes in and says, I at one point in my life intended to be a Hezbollah suicide bomber, but not anymore. Like there's some weird cases like that. But to my knowledge, and I don't remember from when I was in government either, and maybe I'm wrong, but certainly now I don't remember any place where there's like a number of here's cases of what we have known, or here's cases where maybe it might have been. And I imagine there are a whole bunch of reasons why people were wary of trying to collect that data when they couldn't definitively say yay or nay.
Hey guys, I want to give a shout out to a company I've trusted for over 11 years, First Form. They make high quality supplements, protein powders, vitamins, performance products, everything you need to support your health, fitness, and recovery. Look, my weight goes up and down like a lot of us, but when I'm dialed in and focused on my health, these are the products I trust. Their Formula 1 protein powder is my go-to after every workout. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, hands down, is my favorite flavor. I use it after every workout and it tastes amazing. They have other flavors too, like salted caramel, red velvet, and chocolate mint cookie. Not a protein shake person? No problem. Their protein bars taste like candy bars, and my favorite flavor is cookie dough. All the First Form products are made here in the US. No junk, no sketchy ingredients, no BS. Orders over $75 is shipped for free, and if you don't love it, they'll actually give you 110% of your money back. Go check out firstform.com/Borderland now.
Now, in my notes here, it says that Hezbollah has begun building a presence in Latin America. Can you tell me more about that and how long has that been going?
So I wouldn't say has begun building. This goes back to the beginning, right? Hezbollah has been in South America. It's been in Africa for a very long time. Hezbollah was founded in 1982 in Lebanon. And long before then, there were large Lebanese diaspora communities in places like South America and in Africa, having to do with things like people wanting to get their kids out of the country so that they wouldn't be drafted into the Ottoman army, or farmers sending their kids abroad to try and, do better than they'd be able to do in Lebanon when there was severe drought. And so then before Hezbollah, the main Shia organization was Amal. And then as Hezbollah was founded and became more prominent and got a lot more backing and money and weapons from Iran, the same thing started happening in the diaspora, and these communities that used to support Amal started supporting Hezbollah. So we see Hezbollah activity popping up in places like South America around the same time Hezbollah was founded back in Lebanon, around 1982. And the cases go way, way back.
That's crazy to hear. So when we say Hezbollah, just help me out because I might be missing. This is just a belief system, right? This is just a group of individuals who believe in this idea, right?
Look, it's a belief system, but it's more, because Hezbollah is an organization. It has membership. It has sympathizers, and it has operatives. Not every person who sympathizes with Hezbollah is an actual card-carrying member. Not every card-carrying member is trained to carry out operations. This is a movement. It is a political party in Lebanon where it's not illegal. It does run social service organizations in Lebanon. It's a religious organization. Many people support Hezbollah not because of its terrorism, but despite it, or because they don't believe that Hezbollah has done any of the things that we say they've done. That's just a Zionist American conspiracy, right? They support Hezbollah because Hezbollah is the main Shia organization that stands up for the Shia, who were traditionally the downtrodden in Lebanon. And if they didn't have people to step up for them, nobody would. Some people like Hezbollah because they're the group that has successfully stuck their finger in Israel's eye from time to time, in particular in the 2006 war, less so recently.
How are they? So, and reading the notes, I was like, man, this is crazy. So, is there intel or information proving that Hezbollah is also working with cartels in some capacity, whether it be just financially, whether it be whatever it is?
Vince, you trying to wind me up? So this is a big question, okay? And it comes down to this. It's a little bit of how you try and define the problem set. Is it Hezbollah Incorporated that is laundering the proceeds of narcotic sales for the cartels? Or is it individuals acting in their individual capacity who happen to be Hezbollah operatives or sympathizers and happen to be giving some of that money to Hezbollah? But if they were doctors and lawyers, they'd be giving some of that money to Hezbollah. To me, it's a distinction without a difference. It's led to big debates within the U.S. government, pitting the military and law enforcement on one side and certain segments of the U.S. intelligence community on the other. It's not quite that cut and dry, but you'll give me that poetic license. And I, for one, have often felt caught in the middle, both when I was the head of Deputy Chief of Intel at Treasury, and we were looking really closely, a congressionally created Center of Excellence on terror financing at this issue, and as an expert out of government since. To my mind, and I've written about this extensively in the book and elsewhere, there is no question that Hezbollah has done things like put itself out there to launder funds for the cartels. And they've done it very successfully. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has case after case after case. And in one case, the mistress of one of the most senior Hezbollah guys comes to Atlanta, Georgia to get a nose job. While she's there, DEA runs an op. And they're pretty damn good at what they do. I don't think most people realize how much experience DEA has on kind of the blacker side of things. And she thinks she's talking to criminals. And at one point, they basically ask her to establish her bona fides. How do we know you are who you say you are, that you have contacts with the people you say? If she goes, oh, come here. She pulls him over to her laptop and calls up her boyfriend, who's one like the top guys in Hezbollah. And the DEA agents, like their heads almost explode. She gets arrested. She cooperated. She's since been deported. A lawyer in Paris was arrested in the same time, a joint op with the French. There was something called Operation Cedar, U.S. and 7 European countries working together, cracking down on used car dealerships. People are buying, expensive watches. It's an easy way to launder the cash. I mean, case after case after case after case. Does that mean that the head of Hezbollah is like checking the books every day? I'm sure not. But is Hezbollah benefiting from this? Absolutely. To the extent that they were ultimately the U.S. government had to shut down the Lebanese Canadian bank, this massive bank in Lebanon, because Hezbollah was paying the bankers to literally look the other way while I deposit the criminal proceeds from these narcotic sales. And so to me, it's absolutely the case. Hezbollah is in drug production in the Bekaa Valley. It's in Captagon. It's been in marijuana and hashish there. But the big stuff is working with the cartels, not to produce, but to help move and, much more importantly, launder the proceeds.
Whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, and I wasn't sure exactly at what level, but you're saying they've produced, but as well as laundering and as well as moving it. It's a lot more than I expected. How come this is the first time I've ever heard of this?
You're hurting my feelings, because if you say that, it means you haven't been reading my stuff, and I want you to know, I'm a little bit crushed. I'm going to start reading. I don't think you appreciate how good a writer I am.
Man. Well, this is, I guess my world has always been so deep into the cartel space, so much so, but not outside of that, not knowing Hezbollah was even involved in any capacity.
I'll tell you something. This is why I was excited about this. DEA, they kind of stumbled on this. As you well know, DEA started making real huge headway when they started not only following the drugs, but following the money. And in one particular case, they come across this guy, ironically nicknamed himself Taliban, even though Taliban is a Sunni group and he was actually with Hezbollah. And they follow, just kept pulling at these strings, as law enforcement does so well, just following the leads. And he's telling people, look, I don't think you understand. I can get things into that port. How can you get things into that port? No, dude, I'm Hezbollah. Okay, I can do that. Talking about a port in Syria, Latakia port. Someone's like, how are you going to do it? It's like, that's ours. It's ours. We got that.
Crazy.
And case after case after case, we could go all day on these cases. Some of them doing things then like taking the proceeds of the sales of narcotics and reinvesting them in used cars in the United States, shipping those cars to West Africa. I'm not talking about Mercedes. I'm talking about, Honda Accords, Toyota Camrys, big markup, and doing that to launder the funds and also making money on the laundering, because you can make a profit on that sale of the car. It had huge trade-based money laundering schemes, using those proceeds to buy electronics, shipping those electronics to South America, selling the electronics. I mean, really sophisticated stuff. At the end of the day, I don't care if there's not a Hezbollah office with a plaque out front that says, narcotics liaison office. The fact of the matter is they got people who are Hezbollah and are engaged in this activity, and they're kicking back almost all of that profit to Hezbollah. And now, given the beating that Hezbollah has taken from the Israelis, given how desperate they are for money, in part because the Israelis actually blew up piles of money and piles of gold, they're going to be looking to places to make up money. Iran is still giving them money, but Iran just took a beating. And Iran can't easily send money to Hezbollah through Syria anymore because the Assad regime fell. And the new government in Syria is no friend of Iran. So they're going to look to their deep pocket donors in Africa. They're going to look to their networks in South America. And where do you go when you need big money fast? There's one industry you can do for that. And if you've already got a foothold in laundering the proceeds of narcotics for the cartels will give you as much money to launder as you can launder.
Damn. And is there, besides the DEA now who's on top of this, is there other government organizations who now know this or pursuing this and trying to actively have any kind of stoppage of this or slowing down?
Absolutely. U.S. Treasury is very much involved. A lot of these guys get designated. Some of them get designated first on the Counter Narcotics Authority and then get redesignated again under the Counterterrorism Authority. Parts of the intelligence community are very much on top of this. FBI plays a role, especially when there's stuff, FBI and DHS, HSI, Homeland Security investigations, when there's a connection, say in Miami or somewhere else in the country. This gets a lot of attention now. But the reality is we're pulled in lots of directions. And I got to tell you, my concern is that there's been an overcorrection, and lots of counterterrorism folks, agents and others have been pulled to immigration, and there's going to be a gap now. And we've seen, and it's been actually reported since the U.S. bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities, that a bunch of those agents have been moved back to CT now. And I think that that's appropriate because the CT threat's not going away, even as we have to deal with all kinds of other things too.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Well, talk to me about us bombing Iran. What do you see happening now? You're kind of touching on it now, but there's thoughts of potentially sleeper cells, or what do you, in your opinion, what do you think could be coming in the next 5 years?
I really don't like the term sleeper cell. It's so, like Homeland 24 TV. But a few years ago, I testified as an expert, just doing like the Hezbollah 101, not as a fact witness. I didn't know nothing to say about the defendant. And a case in New York against a Hezbollah operative named Ali Karani, who was ultimately convicted, and he's going to be in jail for a long time. And Ali Karani used the term sleeper cell to describe himself. I don't like the term, but when they use it to describe themselves, like, that's appropriate. And FBI asks him, so Mr. Karani, under what circumstances do you think you'll be called upon to act on all the surveillance you've done? He did surveillance of FBI offices in New York, military offices. He did surveillance of JFK International Airport in New York. He did surveillance of the airport in Toronto, Pearson. He did surveillance of Jewish and Israeli institutions in New York. He looked into where he could procure small arms, handguns, and where he could store them, all that kind of stuff. And he answered, well, it would have to be something big, like the U.S. seen to be supporting Israel, and then like killing the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, or killing senior Iranians, or going to war with Iran. Like, Vince, all these things are in the rearview mirror. These things have all happened. The U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani, just bombed Iran's nuclear program. The Israelis killed Hassan Nasrallah, but they see us behind everything they do. So that's why people are concerned. And reportedly, the Iranians sent a message just before the bombing saying, if you do it, we're going to activate sleeper cells. Did they? Did they not? It's really hard to say. But I can tell you for a fact that law enforcement and intelligence officials are not taking this lightly and are leaving no rock unturned. I don't think the problem, though, is only in the immediate. It's not like you bomb the Iranian nuclear program on Saturday night and they respond by Thursday morning. This is something that's going to have a longer tail, right? They have tried multiple times to do things, carry out assassinations in this country, including a plot targeting President Trump to avenge the death of the General Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force, killed in the first Trump administration. They will definitely do that now. They took a severe beating to their nuclear program, to their ballistic missile program, to the Revolutionary Guard, and much more. That will come in time. So there's good reason to be prepared. And I think we need to think on this on kind of a levels of analysis, because historically, sometimes the Iranians have sent operatives of their own, Iranian operatives, to blow up a dissident rally in Paris, for example, which was thwarted, or to conduct surveillance of dissident rallies in the United States, in Los Angeles, in New York, in Washington, D.C. And in one of those cases, one of the Iranians stops in Chicago as he's crisscrossing the country and goes and does surveillance of two Jewish student institutions at the University of Chicago in the United States. In other cases, they've had their terrorist proxies do things for them. There's many cases where Hezbollah has been involved in Iranian assassination plots. And given what Ali Karani said, I think we need to be really wary of that kind of quote unquote sleeper cell. And then the more recent modus operandi has been, since a few of their actual Iranian agents were captured and tried in Europe, to hire organized crime groups, Eastern European organized crime groups, and have those guys carry out acts of assassination plots, abduction plots, or just intimidation plots. They've done it in Europe. They've done it in the United Kingdom. They've done it here just a few weeks ago. Two Eastern European mobsters were convicted in New York in a plot that involved the attempted assassination of Masih Alinejad, a dual American, Iranian citizen and human rights activist, whose big thing is empowering women against the forced hijab rule of the Iranian regime. This is not a woman who's like fomenting a revolution with guns. She's standing up for women's rights, and the regime sees that as very threatening of their theological underpinnings. And so they sent goons first to abduct her in a story out of a bad movie. They were going to put her on a boat in New York Harbor, take her out to a larger boat, take her down to Venezuela by sea, put her on a plane back to Iran, try her and kill her there. That was thwarted. Then they send Eastern European organized crime goons to New York City to kill her, one of whom goes up to her front porch, and with his camera, he's taking surveillance.
No,
and
man.
We have that footage. You can Google it, because she had a Ring camera, and he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. And then he gets arrested around the corner with a loaded AR-15 in his car. This is Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, it is. I was going to ask, what are some of the techniques that you've seen them use in the past? But, I guess my thought is more now. You said that there's not a lot of evidence of too many Hezbollah coming from the southern border. Could have been, but there's not a lot of actual evidence. I'm curious if there's ever a thought. For me, there's a thought of an attack coming from the border. That's the biggest vulnerability we have as a country, of someone just coming through and then kind of sitting in. And I'm not sure if they've ever done anything in other countries that would be similar to that. Is there any kind of history of an attack of that sort that we might be able to kind of see and kind of counter?
Hezbollah and Iranian operatives both typically come in either legally or illegally, meaning using false documents. So there's a bunch of cases where Hezbollah guys had pretty sophisticated false documents, sometimes traveling on false American documents. You might remember a few years ago, 2012, there was a Hezbollah bombing in Burgas, Bulgaria. They blew up a bus of Israeli tourists going to the Black Sea beaches. And the bomber had actually a pretty sophisticated fake Michigan driver's license. It was a few years old, but driver's licenses are, once you're, had one for a few years, are typically good for 10 years. But even that case is amazing because there were two tremendous flaws with this otherwise beautiful false document, false license. Like all the technical parts of it were really well done. The first problem with it was that the guy was wearing a wig straight out of a bad Saturday Night Live skit, like tinsel coming straight out like this. Okay. And the second is this Michigan driver's license had a Baton Rouge, Louisiana address. So no one's been able to answer this for me, but I picture, your guy working under a green banker's light, and he's, your forager, and someone comes in and goes, "Come on, we need it now," and he rushes and he forgets to change the address. When I saw this, I said to the FBI, I'm like, "You got to check that address. Like, what was going on in Baton Rouge, or was it just some random address?" In other cases, we've seen both Iran and Hezbollah sending operatives who are dual nationals, legitimate dual nationals, and traveling someplace on their non-Lebanese, but say French, Swedish, Australian, Canadian, American, or other. Those are all real cases, passports. So I'm not sure that for an operation, they would need to take the risk of doing something that is overtly breaking the law at a time when it's pretty commonly known, if you are on anywhere on the news or socials, that the U.S. is taking border security seriously. I think they'd be able to come into the country otherwise legally, let's put it that way. And we also know that they have supporters in country. We're not talking about thousands of people, probably not talking about hundreds of people, maybe not even dozens of people. But Ali Karani was not the only guy. There have been a couple others since. And we have to believe that there are other people like that. The good news is the FBI in particular has typically been really good about this, really on top of it.
The southern border doesn't just separate the United States and Mexico. It also splits political alliances, ideologies, and sometimes even families. And decisions about immigration, addressing cartel violence, and the border often dictates who will hold the most powerful positions in the world. But what if there was a resource that could cut through the background noise and give perspective from the front lines of the border crisis? I am Vince Vargas, former Army Ranger and Borstar operator, and the host of Ironclad's original podcast, Borderland. I am also the author of a groundbreaking book called Borderland that reveals the untold story of America's first line of defense and special operations of the United States Border Patrol. In the book, I give an inside look at the U.S.-Mexico border through events and life-changing experiences that I took part in during my years of service. I break down the distinct difference between border security and immigration policy through real-world scenarios and insights only available from the front lines. My goal is to counter misconceptions and misinformation about the highly volatile stretch of North America that connects the U.S. and Mexico. So head over to wherever you buy books and pick up a copy today.
Hezbollah, is that, in your opinion, our biggest threat right now in America outside of, we have our cartels, which I don't call them as much of a threat because they haven't done physical violence towards Americans, right? They're just doing it through drugs and smuggling. But just in the time we have right now with Iran happening and everything else, is that to you the biggest threat that we should be paying attention to?
Look, unfortunately, we have a kind of cocktail of threats we're dealing with. And I do think that recent events give a little bit of a spike to the Iran-Hezbollah side of the threat ledger. Not a week goes by in this country where there isn't some news about ISIS, Islamic State, still. A guy was just convicted on Friday in Chicago of being an ISIS media guy out of the Chicago area. There was just an arrest in California. That continues to be, even though there is no Islamic State as such, we and our allies collectively inflicted real territorial defeat on them. We have the country of Iraq, and now also under the new regime, the country of Syria are actually doing good things against them, but it still exists as an idea, as a virtual caliphate, if you will. Al-Qaeda is not down and out, and these groups have all used the Hamas attacks of October 7th, even though they tend to hate Hamas, as great recruiting and radicalization tools. They don't really care much about the Palestinian cause, but it's a great it's a great way to rile people up and take advantage of it. But I have to say, my biggest concern in this country, across the ideological spectrum, across the Sunni and Shia Islamist or jihadist spectrum, far right, far left, neo-Nazi, all of it, my biggest fear is more of the homegrown violent extremist. The general sense around the world, but in this country too, that violence is no longer taboo, that things are so bad, fill in for things, whatever your particular ideological cause is upset about, that violence under at least some circumstances is okay. Pew ran a poll several years ago that said it was something like almost or just about 30% of Americans said that under certain circumstance, violence is okay. And I don't care what your ideology is, that's very scary. And so my biggest concern coming out of this Iran war is that someone's going to take it upon themselves to decide they got to do something against a symbol of American officialdom or a Jewish or Israeli, community target, rather than some Hezbollah or ISIS commando coming through and sneaking up on us in black balaclavas.
Is there, how do I ask this question? Do you believe that there's an effective method that the U.S. can use to help slow down or diplomatically, anything you can think of that we could hopefully disrupt Hezbollah and their growth and their ideologies and without getting a stronger foothold on America? Like, is there something that you believe America can do or we haven't done to kind of improve our situation against them if in the event that they decide to, attack in some capacity or whatnot?
Let's leave the attack thing aside for the moment, right? Because that's a strictly law enforcement thing. But I think there is, if you allow me, silver linings out of all of the craziness that's been going on in the world the past couple of years in particular, a little silver lining. Iran, not just its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, but its Revolutionary Guard just took a beating. Syria, which was a critical component of what it called its axis of resistance, is no longer aligned with Iran. Lebanon, Hezbollah took a beating as well, and now there's finally, there hadn't been a new government in Lebanon in many years. Finally, there's a new government in Lebanon that actually wants to establish a monopoly over the use of force to reclaim sovereignty over the country. And there's a lot of diplomatic effort going on literally right now as you and I are speaking to convince the government of Lebanon and enable the government of Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, to disarm the Palestinian terrorist groups in some of the camps there. There is an opportunity now to capitalize on the way these militants have been cut off at the knees and further attack their funding, constrict the operating environment in which they can do things. Hezbollah has closed military zones in Lebanon. I'm not talking about the government of Lebanon's military, the Lebanese armed forces. This is a non-state actor. Imagine some terrorist group taking over some area here in the United States, saying this is a closed military zone. No one can come here, including the U.S. Army, including police, including FBI. Right? That's not tenable. So there are opportunities now, and there's a lot of countries that are interested in pursuing that. Not just the United States, many of our European allies, the Germans, the French, the Brits in particular, our Gulf allies in the Persian Gulf. And there's an opportunity now to take advantage of the losses that they've experienced. And then if law enforcement here in the United States with intel support can do the work that it's doing, identifying not people of some sympathy for an organization, but people who mean to do harm, then we do those two things in tandem. We can actually do some good.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's such an area that I have no clue on. I had no idea their presence in South America was what it was, which makes me even more, I wouldn't say concerned, but that makes it very interesting of thinking how much of cross movement has there been in the past. It makes me more aware of that now. Is there anything else that you want to add to this? There's so much here with Hezbollah that I know that my audience is probably this is going to be very new information. Is there something that I missed on my questions that you'd like to answer?
I'm really looking forward to the spike in book sales from your audience as they all want to know more and they run to my book on Hezbollah. So thank you all in advance. Look, I'll say one last thing. When you get really into the weeds on this, there are some other leads that can be done. And I'm not saying anything that law enforcement folks don't already know about and work on. But for example, especially in the Western Hemisphere, really around the world, but Hezbollah has a real track record of being drawn to free trade zones. So Hezbollah, for example, is famously operates out of the tri-border area where the borders of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay meet. That's a free trade zone. And after 9/11, when the U.S. approached some of those countries and said, we want you to do more to stop jihadis of whatever type, Sunni, Shia, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, whatever, and they started taking some action, mostly tax fraud and that type of thing, not actual counterterrorism, but fine, that's equally disruptive. Al Capone them, that's fine with me. Then we saw them pop up in other free trade zones like Iquique, Chile, or Margarita Island, Venezuela, Panama Canal Zone. And so, like, we know certain types of behaviors and certain types of places. There's opportunities now when Iran's been knocked down, Hezbollah's been knocked down, Hamas has been knocked down, to take advantage of that and make sure that they can't recoup. And at the same time, as you noted in the opening, like there are other threats too. Like we started dealing with the ISIS, we're still dealing with Al-Qaeda, and we're dealing with far left and far right in this country too. You know, when I started working in counterterrorism in the 1990s, terrorism was almost entirely something that came from abroad and affected us here. That's not the case anymore, right?
Yeah.
Even within those organizations that maybe had ideological roots elsewhere, more often than not, an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS or a Hezbollah guy here is someone who got radicalized here, is someone who got connected with people here. So there's both a law enforcement component to that and what you might call social cohesion, you know, kind of building strong communities, building resilience within U.S. society, making sure that our schools are strong. So when a kid is sent to one of our schools, they get taught a kind of a classic American education. You know, we're a melting pot. You know, you can come to this country legally and you become part of this country. Every one of us, you and I and everybody we know, except for Native Americans, we came from someplace. And so it's not just a law enforcement effort.
Yeah, that's off topic a little bit, but I believe still in your wheelhouse of information. It becomes interesting that we have so many small factions of cultures. And I had a conversation with another gentleman on the podcast about the potential fears in the future. If there's too many pockets, we start losing the American kind of way of life. Is that something that you see happening in the future as well, just with many different cultures, many different populations?
I don't know. Like, you know, we had waves of immigration from Ireland, from Italy. We had Little Italy. And what happens is second generation, certainly third, people get more acculturated, right? Yeah. But it's not uncommon for people who are coming, especially if it's a new language, if it's a new culture, to move in pockets together. What you want is for, you know, that kind of next generation, again, typically through the schools, to feel not only like they are, you know, tied back to whatever the home country was, where maybe grandma and grandpa still live, or you have cousins or whatever, but to feel American. And that's what's so critically important, because and by the way, it's law enforcement are the first ones to point to that, because if we don't do that right, there's going to be more people going to move down the path of radicalization and suddenly become a law enforcement problem. And law enforcement would like us to address this earlier on in the process so people don't get onto that path. And that leaves us a lot to do. And I'm concerned that some of the most successful programs on preventing violent extremism in the first place are recently being shut down. I think there's an overcorrection in how much is being shut down in government. No question, government ballooned. I saw it in the inside myself. There's no question about it. But I think that we've overcorrected. And I think that there are critical counterterrorism. But even more importantly, if you move the needle earlier in the process, prevention efforts to counter violent extremism that we're at risk of losing. And that worries me. I think that if it does happen, we're going to end up having more people kind of move further along that radicalization process, and more of them get to the point where they're a law enforcement problem.
It's an interesting thought, and I like it. I do like it. Yeah, that's exactly what my question was. And man, it's very interesting. We have a lot of different experts here, and not an expert from your space. And so it's a very awesome conversation. I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much. I
appreciate being here. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the work that you do, and it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to your audience, people who care about these issues. Thanks for letting me be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. I'm going to go buy your book right now.
How many?
One. We'll do one for one. Mine's at Amazon too.
All right, my friend. All right.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Borderland Narcosis. I hope you guys enjoyed your time with us. Please don't forget to share and like, as well as don't forget First Form supplements. Don't forget to go to firstform.com/Borderland. And until next time, take care.